Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as we look at the Flair football sets of the late 1990s. Now, leading up to this point, Flair had always been a bit of a challenge for Flair to figure out just exactly how the brand was going to work. It was supposed to compete head-to-head with SP and Finest. It was supposed to be kind of the counterpoint to those. But both of those sets had distinctions to them. They had qualities that made them kind of alluring and got people to really pursue collecting them beyond just the set. And Flair just didn't really have that, so they had to kind of rebuild the model from the ground up. And what they ultimately settled on was a set laden with parallels. It was completely built around parallels, but it was also built around another level of complexity that made it kind of confusing. And I'll do my best to help you out with that so that you can kind of follow along. But the idea of using a heightened level of parallels where it was almost like they were inspired by the 96 Finest set and what they created. But by creating this, they created a fun set that had a confusing element that just didn't really bring anything to the set. It had a gimmick quality that could have done something, and in fact in 98 they actually turned it into something, but for 97 it was an unnecessary move. So the set that they created was 120 cards long, and within that they had broken down 3 groups of 40. These groups of 40 are in no way related to anything. They're not subsets, they're not types of players, they're not positions, they're not teams. It's completely random. All the cards are random, and the groupings are just kind of a level of complexity that they threw in there just for kicks. So I'll get to that a little bit later on, but I need to focus first on the actual parallels themselves. So the card set is 120 cards, and the fronts of the cards come in 3 different what they call tiers. And the tiers are broken down in terms of tier 2, tier 1, and tier 0. The idea is that if you're in a stadium, when you're in the mid-tier of the stadium, you don't have really good vision. When you're down close to the field, you have really good view. And then tier 0 is basically like you're on the field, so you're right there by the action. So if you want to think of the rarity of these cards, think like golf. The lower the number is the more rare. And this particular approach that they took, it really gets confusing in 98 when they added another tier, which I'll get to in a second. But as far as 1997 goes, this is how they built it. So tier 2, which is the base card, that is a standard Flair card. It's thick, it's kind of a black and white treatment, and it's got some gold text down on the bottom, and it has a portrait in the back, an action shot in the front, and the cards they don't really look all that special. On the back they have both the tier and they have the card number, so you can see the 2 on the back. And finally Flair figured out how to make these really distinctive. And that was a huge benefit to these particular cards. The back also reads really well, and that's another advantage that Flair had. I don't know how long it took them to finally figure it out, but they finally got this right. So that's tier 2. Tier 1, tier 0 have the same backs on them. So I'm not going to get into that, but tier 1, the front of the card now has a full color background, and there's a more of an intricate image on this particular card, so it looks a little bit more thought out. And the text for the player name is now tighter, it's more formal, and they have kind of a color shadow behind that's themed for the particular team. So these cards look a lot better. And then tier 0 is really interesting because the images do look different, but the big thing here is that the background now has this very chaotic, frenetic, rainbow, not chiseled, but rainbow textured effect that when you get the light just right, it's a brilliant look. It's really stand out, and you can't really see the player at that point. So this card is a celebration of the card, and it's an odd thing to do. Usually you want to make a card that is focusing on the player. In this case, it's just a celebration of the card, and it's really cool in that manner. So if you're collecting a set, this really makes a lot of sense. If you're collecting a player, it's just another player card. But it is a fun player card to have. And so each one of these tiers is all 120 cards. So tier 2, 120 cards. Tier 1, all the numbers are the same. Everything lines up. So each player has 3 versions of the same card. And they also made another parallel, which is their Legacy collection. And the Legacy collection is a parallel of all of those. So there are 3 groups of 120. That's 360 cards for the main set. They have 360 Legacy cards as well. So every player has 3 standard cards, and they have 3 Legacy cards. The legacy cards are not broken down into the same level of rarity. So the main cards are more rare as you get down in the numbers of the tiers. In the legacy cards, they're all the same because they're all serial numbered out of 100. So the legacy cards have blue foil replacing the gold foil on the front, and on the back they have blue foil for the serial number for each card. And so if you're trying to collect the row 0 legacy cards, understand they're just as rare as the row 2. There's not a difference there. There are tiers, right? And I just realized as I was saying that, tripping over tier and row, it's actually rows, not tiers. So I'm not sure why tiers was in my mind, but it's row 2, row 1, and row 0. And regardless of what term you're using, the legacy cards are still the same value for each of the rows. So like I said, there were groupings of 40, and that was a distinct feature of this particular set. But what did they do with it? Well, on the back, they didn't change the back, but they put a little icon down on the bottom. And the icons are for the 3 following names. They're for Showpiece, they're for Showstopper, and they're for Showtime. And each one of these particular themes is a different level of rarity. So even within the 120 cards of each of the 3 rows, there are different levels of rarity within. This doesn't mean anything. It just means that as you're collecting the set, one group of 40 is easier to collect, another group of 40 is a little bit harder. And those 3 themes, they change with each of the tiers. So to use an example, there's 1, 2, and 3 for row 2. For row 1, there's 2, 3, and 1, and then likewise. And so each card has 3 different tiers, and it has 3 different themes, and they don't align across the entire set, which means that the rarity of each of these particular sub-themes within the same row, it creates different pockets of rarity within the set, which is annoying if you're trying to collect a set, because you just want to collect the set. But I don't really need to go into explaining it all, just because you're still either going to collect your player, collect your team, or collect your set, however it is. But they did decide to add this level of complexity just, I don't know, I guess to make it interesting. But they would continue this in 1998, which didn't do them any favors. Now they also had 4 insert sets, and the first insert set was Hot Hands. Hot Hands is an all die cut set, and just like the Wave of the Future in 95, these are thick cards with die cutting around the outside. And the die cutting is a cool idea, it's a cool effect, but it doesn't look great, especially with the background on the card, which is just like a flame background, and it's a little bit too much. But if you don't spend time looking at the card, it's a great card. So try to keep your focus on this card down a bit, and you're going to enjoy them a lot. The second set is their Midas Touch, and Midas Touch is basically star players, and the background is a gold finish, and that's pretty much about it. These are all pretty rare cards, but the Midas Touch is not die cut. It's kind of all in all, it's kind of a boring card. What's not boring is their Now and Then cards. These are 4 cards looking at 4 different draft years: 84, 89, 90, and 91. And it looks at 3 different players in each of those sets. And it has on the front, everything's all in color, and it has the players as they appear in their uniforms now. And then on the back, they have a sepia tone finish, and it's the players as you saw them back then. So really the only distinction in this is that on the front, John Elway has a current logo, and on the back, he has his classic 80s John Elway era D helmet logo. But other than that, these are very, very rare cards, and they're really beautiful cards. The last set is the traditional Wave of the Future cards for all of the rookies. And these cards this is something they did in pretty much every single set. And it's kind of cool and kind of frustrating because they added some sequiny features on the front that are not embedded into the card. They're actually on top, and these flake off really easily. Now, you're not going to tell the difference if it flakes off or not. It's more about it making a mess, but it is annoying because you want these cards to be preserved, and you got to be really careful with these Wave of the Future cards. But on the plus side, they're very common, so you can always get more if you need to. For 1998, they started off with a preview card, and the preview card was actually in the Ultra set, and it's basically just a preview card. Keep in mind there are 10 of these cards, and they have different numbers from the main set. The cards do look different, but it's a little bit tricky, so you may run into one of these because they were pretty common in those particular packs. But the 98 set is a little bit more, they did more with it than they had done in 97. First off, the 3 sub-themes that they had with the 40 card groupings, they did 4 of these in 20 card groupings. So I'm just going to say that's also in there. I'm not going to go into it. I'll show you, like with the 97, I'll show you a picture showing all of the different alignments, but I'm not going to belabor it because again and again and again, you're just collecting the players, you're just collecting the teams, you're just collecting the set however it comes. But this time, like I said, they did 4 different rows. They did row 3, 2, 1, and 0. So row 3 is the same as the previous row 2, and row 2 is the same as the previous row 1. They look a little bit different, but still they're basically the same. The original row 0, which is now row 1, has a different approach that they took to the front. It still is doing pretty much the same thing, but it looks quite a bit different. And then row 0 for this is where things really get elaborate. But before I get to that, I do want to note, if you're ever confused by if it's 97 or 98, look at the numbers on the back, because on 97, they have the number on one side and the row on the other side, and they're individual little boxes, very clear. In 98, they group all 3 together, and here they are actually able to then play into the sub-theme. So in 98, the row 0 cards are actually all serial numbered, and they're all serial numbered with keeping in mind the fact that they have these sub-themes that make 4 different levels of rarity. So some of the cards are numbered out of 2,000, some are numbered out of 1,000, some are numbered out of 500, and the rest are numbered out of 250. So these are much more rare, and within that there is a very heightened level of rareness that you're going to encounter. Like with 97, they had legacy cards of all of these, and they were also numbered out of 100, so there was no change in that regard. There's just a few more cards. And then they have one insert set, only one insert set for this particular year, and that's the feature film cards. And these are busy, overly designed cards that they look kind of cool, but they're cards you don't want to spend a lot of time looking at. And they have a little acetate cell in it, kind of like a cell in a reel of film. But I believe that it's always just the same picture. It's not actually a sequence of pictures like collectible cells. So it's just an image in it, and it's okay. This is the Peyton Manning rookie year, and they have one of these for Peyton Manning, so that's really kind of the big thrill of it. But that is the only insert that they did with this particular set. So for 1999, they realized that this level of complexity was a little bit too much, so they decided to shift it a bit, and they made basically just one 192 card set. And this was kind of an interesting thing that they did, because they grouped the set into 3 groups: 32, 64, and technically 96. But it's really 32, 64, 64, and 32. The first 3 groupings are of no different value or rarity. It's only the last group that is, and it's all serial numbered out of 1999. So that's why I distinguished the last little group as being separate, even though thematically it's designed to be like the second 64 card grouping. The first grouping is a much better version of the typical high tier number. These cards are, I would say, a little bit more interesting than previously. They're still the least interesting of all these cards. The second grouping is, to me, the best card in this group. And the big thing here is the big number on the back, and it's a really, really, really well done number. It has its own texturing from the rest of the card, and it jumps out in a fantastic way. The third grouping is a horizontally oriented card, which is one of the only times that Flair ever did a horizontally oriented card. And this card grouping extends out into these serial numbered cards, which is a combination of veterans and of rookies. Now with this set, it's really kind of interesting that there are players who have a card in every single one of these 4 groupings, and there are others that may appear in only one. Like, for instance, the rookies only appear in the serial numbered cards, so there are only a couple of veterans who appear in there. But most of the veterans are only going to have 2 cards, possibly 3 in this set. It also has the typical legacy across the entire run, and these are actually numbered out of 99 as opposed to 100. Why they made the change, it makes sense in terms of the number. It's just I'm not sure why they didn't do 98 in the previous year, but this particular year they came up with that idea. They also have 4 insert sets, and 2 of them are based upon rookies. So the first one is Class of 99. These are serial numbered out of 500, and they're the various rookies, and they're really nice cards, kind of busy, horizontally oriented, but they're busy in a good way. These cards look really cool, and they're worth being the rare cards in these inserts. They also did a first rounders, and this is more of a blasé card. Doesn't really stand out, pretty common. So these are the ones you're going to run into the most. They also have their Shrine Time cards, and these are cards where they tried to do something and they did too much of the little bit that they did. They have kind of a lively back, similar to what they had done in the row zeros of the previous 2 years, but with this one, it really takes over the entire card. So it looks nice as long as you don't let the light hit it. These are also serial numbered out of 1500, so they're also kind of rare. And then the last insert set that they had is the Feel the Game cards. And these are jersey cards, but they're Flair style jersey cards. So at this point, just about everybody was doing jersey cards, and this is the way that Flair did it, and they look great. That's kind of about it. But by the end of this year, they didn't know where to go next, and so they rebranded, because already these were actually called Flair Showcase. So they lost the Flair name, and they rebranded Showcase as its own set. They'd come back with Flair later on in 2002, but until then, this was the end of this particular run. They're great cards, they were a lot of fun, and I'll be looking at the later Flair cards down the road. But for now, this is going to be the extent of Flair in football that I'm going to be talking about. So I hope that this was pretty informative. I hope that you didn't get lost in all of it. And I hope that you were able to not just keep up, but to stay interested in what was going on. If you do have any questions about it, by all means, let me know in the comments below. And be sure to check out my other videos. Hit the like button if you can. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. And ring the bell to make sure that you get to see when my next videos come out. And thank you very much for watching.